Hello, everybody. It's Neil Mackinnon here, and welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing Yannick Jacob. When I first reached out to Yannick to see if he'd be up for coming on the podcast, I was honest that I couldn't remember where I'd first encountered him. He's a prolific writer, podcaster, and speaker on lots of elements of coaching, and I'd been reading and listening to him for a few years, becoming increasingly interested in his journey as a coach, the way he explains his approach and practice, and the philosophies that underpin that. So, when he agreed to a conversation, I was delighted to have the opportunity to dig deeper into all of this, and our discussion didn't disappoint. Yannick is an existential life and leadership coach, a positive psychologist, and the Programme Director of the Accredited Certificate in Integrative Coaching at the School of Positive Transformation. In this episode of The Coach's Journey, he shares what he learned about himself in order to hear his calling and live his truth as someone driven to explore the whole spectrum of what life has to offer. We talk about the links between his many passions, such as existential philosophy and DJing, and how integrating his variety of interests enriches all areas of his work. Yannick also discusses his groundbreaking coaching lab, which offers the chance to witness highly experienced coaches live at work, and Rocket Supervision, which provides coaches with the support they need to practice at the top of their game. The episode will resonate with anyone who wants to feel empowered to shake up traditional coaching paradigms and create a practice that feels authentic and energizing, as Yannick brings his remarkable breadth of experience and expertise to bear on some of the most fundamental questions we face as coaches and as human beings. In this episode, Yannick and I also talk about courageous choices and how embracing discomfort can help to build meaning, enlarging your sphere of influence to enable people to connect with you, the power of being financially committed to something, and the benefits to your clients of raising your fees, when we should be brave enough to challenge the traditional frame and share more of ourselves with our clients, what it means to be alive, and whether existential coaching may hold some of the answers. And we explore the view that how you do anything is how you do everything, until you challenge the paradigm. Yannick issues a rallying cry to everyone in coaching to frame their space, sculpt the approach that works for them, and lean into their passion for their own way of doing things. I had an absolute blast talking to Yannick and hope you enjoy the episode. And so, without further ado, here's my conversation with Yannick Jacob. Yannick Jacob, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Neil, thank you so much for inviting me. What an honor.
It's great to have you here, and thank you for finding the time. I appreciate it. And I have some sense from the reading, the listening, and just the general awareness of your work that you are a busy person with many responsibilities. So I appreciate you finding the time.
Well, you catch me at a good time because this time, beginning of 2025, I made a conscious decision to take a step back and create some space for me. Take a step back from, we've been following quite a significant content strategy, and we've been very visible, putting a lot of value out there for coaches, which I find very, very meaningful, right? Because the generative impact of helping coaches work better with other people, it carries the work out into so many corners that you alone would never be able to reach. But also it takes a lot of strain to be so present, right? So I'm still coaching a lot and running a lot of groups, and then managing a team and managing content and managing systems. And so, towards the end of last year, I'm like, I think I need to retreat into the ocean a little bit and see what next wave is brewing, see what it feels like to lean back into my full authentic self, which is, going with the flow and being really present to what is. So right now I have created some space for exactly these kind of conversations, right? Connecting more. And that feels really good. So you catch me at a good time for this.
Fantastic. And I want to come on to content strategy and business building perhaps a bit later. But thank you for sharing and also acknowledging the effort necessary to be as visible and to create as much material that you give away. And indeed, it is that material that is how I first discovered you. People who've listened to the podcast for any length of time probably have sensed that the majority of the hosts are fairly voracious consumers of content, as well as creating the coach's journey. And it was through your podcast talking about coaching, it was through your YouTube channel that I kept bumping into you in different ways and thinking, oh, this guy's got some interesting stuff to say. And at least as I experienced it, is saying it in a particularly authentic and clear way that doesn't feel apologetic. I mean, I think it's fair to say you have some views and you express them clearly, and that drew me into the world of what you share. So thank you for putting that out into the world.
I appreciate you saying that. Authenticity sits close to my heart. Part of being an existentialist, but also before I knew about existentialism, it always meant a lot to me to show up as you are in as many facets as that may be like, right? But to develop an authentic voice, I think is one of the most important parts of being a coach if you're working relationally, right? And I love the coaching that works relationally. And for some time, I didn't accept that there was any other coaching worth doing that isn't relational. Now, I've matured in those kind of views. I think every style of coaching has its value. But yeah, I love leaning into that. And that requires this authentic relating. So it's really nice to hear that comes across.
Fantastic. And again, you're touching on other things around relational coaching that are big areas that we may explore a little bit later, and very much aligns with my view and approach to coaching. Yeah. I want to start at the beginning and talk a little bit about how you found your way towards coaching and perhaps where things started for you professionally. So where's a good place to start?
Oh, yeah. How far back do we go? I think we can go very far back in terms of as far as I can remember, I've always been quite reflective and curious, keen to understand things. Then fast forward quite a bit. You come to that time when my generation had to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life. You come out of school and you're like, oh, now I'm choosing the rest of my life right now, which is fertile ground for many existential crises for many people, right? Because this element of choice and uncertainty and all the unlived lives that are the results of those choices. And I didn't know about positive psychology then, but I'm not quite sure where it came from, but I tuned into what am I like as a person? Where are my strengths? What do I enjoy doing? And I've had learned about myself that I need a lot of variety in my life. I had gone through so many different sports, so many different hobbies, and also so many different people, right? I had so many different friends that were really very, very different to each other. When I invited people to parties, there was always, what kind of music did we listen to? Because, one type of music would alienate the other groups. And, there's so much variety and diversity coming in. And I think unconsciously I invited that into my life because that makes life very interesting and it also makes life challenging. But I knew I needed some variety. So when it came to what am I going to do for the rest of my life, I'm like, I need to choose something that's not going to get boring very quickly. Because if I invest, studying a degree, significant years of what I considered the best years of my life, then I wanted this to not be wasted. Right now, I know it's never wasted, but I'm like, okay, what's not going to get boring? And then I figured, well, that's people. I'm quite an introvert, so in a way that kind of surprised me, but I like to spend time with myself. But people are never going to get boring. As soon as you're in relationship, people change all the time. And even if you think you've got someone figured out or even a group of people figured out, they tend to surprise you and, throw your world upside down. Even if you do think you know someone very well, they'll surprise you. And if you work with a person, 2 weeks later, there might be a different person because some paradigm has shifted based on an experience that they've had. So I'm like, okay, people, I think that would work for me. So I decided to study psychology. And then through psychology, I was drawn to therapy and counseling because of the depth of the relationship and the significance, the meaning behind what people bring to that space, the openness, the confidentiality, the space itself, people really open up to you. And I also learned about myself in friendship relationship that people seem to find it easy to open up to me. There seems to be a level of trust there that builds very quickly. So I figured, so therapy, counseling, I think that might be something for me. And then I fell into positive psychology just because the second master's in the world happened to be at the university I was studying psychology at. So in my last year of psychology, I talked to this Ilona lady who ran the module in the third year of studies on positive psychology, which I had almost missed because I came late into the first week of uni in my third year from a holiday. And usually I would go to all the lectures and then make my pick. And I was too late for that. So I just went to the library and opened the first book on positive psychology, some introductory textbook. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. What's right with people, the science of what's right with people, the strength and resources we can build on, positive emotions, love, hope, strength, resilience. Like, this is so cool. And so new. It felt quite rebellious. It's like challenging the status quo of psychology. There's so much more beyond not having problems. So,
and I noticed, sorry to cut across you, I noticed it as a real contrast to your interest in a therapeutic approach, in as much as you're looking at the positive as opposed to what are the challenges, what are the difficulties that people are bringing.
Yeah, exactly. It really challenged what I've been studying, right? And I realized through discovering that do I really want to sit down all day, every day, and listen to people who are really struggling? Because I wish people would go to therapy more when they don't really have problems, just as a deep exploration of self. And it does happen, right? Wise people go to some form of analysis or some form of therapy to really get to know themselves, have an outlet, sit with themselves, take a step back. A lot of coaches offer that. Coaching as a step back from the busy life to consider who we are and if we're still on the right path. So, but at that time and still now, the reality of being a therapist is people come to therapy when they feel they're in a hole and they can't get out. And that can be a pretty dark place and pretty gloomy and very slow, right? So you need to bring a lot of patience. My father, as much as I love him, was not the most patient man. And I have some of that, So I found coaching through positive psychology because the science of positive psychology informs much coaching, right? Because of the nature of the questions that the researchers are asking. These are similar questions to what coaches are asking or should be asking, So moving forward, looking at what can we build on. So positive psychology and coaching have often been referred to as natural partners or natural allies, or coaching as an applied arm of positive psychology science. So I found coaching through positive psychology, and then I was hooked. I'm like, this is so me, right? But then also I found that a lot of my positive psychology colleagues were maybe a little bit too positive, and that I quickly found the kind of limits of what the approach can offer. And within positive psychology, to be fair, as a field, there's several waves, and the third and fourth wave of positive psychology really go beyond the positive and the individual and look at more systemic lenses and look at more integrated ways of working with people with positive psychology. But essentially, positive psychology started as something that wasn't supposed to stand on its own legs. So at that time when I was studying it, the second and third wave hadn't quite flourished. So I'm like, I need a bit more than positive psychology. So when I decided to really dig into coaching, I did a master's in coaching, and I chose existential coaching. Because it was an old mentor of mine, Nash Popovich. He had he'd seen that there's a new master's in existential coaching, also the first one in the world, and he said, like, I have a sense that you might be interested in this, because he knew I was looking for something more integrative, an approach to coaching that would go beyond the positive, beyond the solution focused, beyond the performance, to work a bit more across the spectrum of what people can experience. So he had a good hunch, because when I found that master's, I had some conversations. I looked into that. It felt like that is this integrative approach that I was looking for, because of the nature of the existential questions. It would go into tremendous depth sometimes, but in a way that is focused on moving forward. And much of existential, even my existential therapy, it's quite critical of pathologizing people. Mm-hmm. And it's critical of medicating people. It's like opening up a space where people can relate to themselves, figure out how to navigate this life thing, but without this illusion of everything being well. Life is full of anxiety and suffering, and it takes a lot of courage to just be human, just be in the world with other people. There's all these tensions, paradoxes. And so the human condition is a challenging one. And existential coaches take that into account, so that is in some ways a stark contrast to positive psychology coaching. But there's tremendous meeting points that I don't know, I saw them. So I came into existentialism with a positive psychology lens. And for me, it was all very positive, right? Because it's empowering, and, it's emphasizing having a choice, and yes, making courageous choices. But this intersection of positive psychology and existentialism, really, I found my home, philosophically and psychologically. And looking at all the different coaching approaches, the range of what coaching can be, but through an existential lens, also had me realize that balance and integration had always been a theme in my life. From sports to relationships to, how I was, where I was looking. Even at university, I looked into this topic and that topic and then pulled them together. In sports, I looked at this and that and pulled them together. I love snowboarding. There's so many influences that go into snowboarding that you can draw from. And coaching music, I've been a DJ for like 24 years. And so integration is the essence of good DJing, depending on how you define it. But you pull things together. You pull things from different sources and you make them a meaningful one. And in coaching, I realized it's the same thing that I'm doing. So I was DJing less and less and coaching more and more. And at some point I got a bit worried. I'm like, oh, am I losing? I went out of the house without my headphones, and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot my headphones. How could this happen? Who am I becoming? And then I realized I'm doing the same things in coaching that I've always been doing. I'm integrating. There's balance, there's presence, there's relationship, there's meaningful depth, and this all made a lot of sense. And coaching as a creative art form, but also a technical skills, bringing that together. And it's so meaningful when it's happening relationally. So I'll pause there.
Thank you. And I think in that sharing, what, for me at least, you've articulated is a definition of positive psychology, an acknowledgement of its limitations as a pure field, which I think can be levied at it from an uninformed place. And I recognize for you, with your experience in education, it comes from a very informed place and a place of having thoroughly explored it as a school of thought, and an appreciation of the third and fourth waves. I want to check in on one thing you mentioned around positive psychology never being designed to stand on its own two legs. And could you say more about that?
Yeah, well, being designed is an interesting way of putting it in science, right? Because there is a forefather, there's the godfather of positive psychology, is sometimes called Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman, when he became president of the American Psychological Association in 1999, he announced, usually a president, when you become president, you bring a theme, you bring something to the field. And what he brought is through his experience or his background in learned helplessness, he was the one who put dogs in cages and gave them electroshocks and see if they would escape. You shock them when there's a barrier, and so they learn that they cannot escape the pain. And even when you remove the barrier, they have learned that there's no escape, so they don't even try. Very sad experiments. But Seligman learned that, well, if you can learn to be helpless, you can learn to be more optimistic. So he had a moment with his own granddaughter where, he's quite a grouch, his own words, he's quite grumpy. And his granddaughter inspired him that maybe he can choose to be more positive, and so he announced that we have not spent much research money at all, almost none when you compare it to all the problem-focused research, into looking empirically at many of the ideas that philosophically have been around for thousands of years. It's totally thought about happiness. So, we don't have data on this, and this data can inform policy and decision-making and institutions and the law and education, so we need to spend more research money on what's a good life and what's right with people. So has it been designed? I'm not sure, but the idea was important. So, but Seligman was very clear in the beginning that the field of psychology is incomplete, and we need a new branch of psychology to help complete psychology. So we are researching things that, are not currently researched, and then we can integrate it into psychology as a whole. But positive psychology became so popular, partly because of its name and partly because of the excitement that I felt, when I got into it. You can imagine how quickly journalists and the media have picked up some of these research studies about what makes you live longer and what makes you happier. And here's some interventions that you can do to raise your level of well-being. And all of these things are so good for you. You live longer, you earn more money, you have more sex, better relationships, like what's not to like? And then very quickly it's like, hey, look, don't tell that to a person who's currently going to a depression, because, there's more to it than just going to take a walk through the woods. Even if it does significantly help people, there's more complexity to life. And so that's how positive psychology started. And it was not supposed to stand on its own legs. And there was a guy called Lazarus who wrote an essay in 2003, I think, that was entitled Positive Psychology, a Movement Without Legs, ? And, that was the time where a lot of people thought, okay, maybe we have to do some more thinking about this. And that also, even though it was much earlier than I got into the field, I was like, oh, my legs are within that exploration of the human condition, that philosophical grounding.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. And a beautiful segue with philosophical grounding, perhaps into a little more exploration of the fundamentals of existentialism. Again, I think you've already provided a very compelling summary of how it intersects and integrates and complements and contrasts positive psychology. So for those relatively new to it as a term, or perhaps have heard it bandied around and would like a little more shape to what existentialism is and how it informs a coaching approach or how it informs a coaching practice, what might you say?
Yeah, it always comes out differently, but in essence, existential coaching is informed by existential philosophy. And that's the philosophy of what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to exist? What does it mean to be human? Be human in the world with other humans. There's, I mentioned these tensions, paradoxes, dilemmas, like there's existential anxiety always underneath the surface. It doesn't mean that we can't be happy because, there's flow states and we kind of forget about that these tensions are there when we're like so involved in something. But when we become still, and people have experienced that during COVID, or they experienced that perhaps during meditation, or in those moments when we're just sitting with ourselves, something that can be quite uncomfortable, a bit eerie, comes up. And that reminds us that, there are tensions and we cannot live without tensions. Most psychological approaches recognize that there's tension in the human condition, right? That there's poles, that we're being stretched. There's something that doesn't quite sit right, and aiming for a life where everything feels good constantly is just unrealistic, right? So existential philosophers have thought a lot about the human condition and used the method of philosophy, a method of inquiry, to figure out what there is. And at the base, existentialists don't agree on a lot of things, but they tend to agree on this, that there's certain conditions that characterize the human condition. So we're striving for meaning. We're meaning-making machines, you might say, in a world where we can't be sure about what the meaning is. Meaning of life. We can find meaning in life, something we find meaningful in moments. But as a whole, we don't know what any of this means. And if there is a big meaning of life, then we couldn't grasp it with any amount of certainty with our human capacity. Right. So there's always uncertainty, and we're battling the absurdity of life, maybe the seeming absurdity, maybe as real absurdity. We just don't know. Right. So we always strive for meaning in a world that may not have any. That's one condition, right? The other one is death. Existentialists have a reputation to love talking about death. Really, what we're talking about is temporality, endings. And there is no being human without endings. Everything ends, meetings end, podcasts end, relationship ends, life ends. And the ending of life, death, is perhaps the most significant ending. There's uncertainty now about death, even, because with all the nauseatingly fast developments in nanotech, biotech, I was interviewed for a documentary once, and they went around the world asking different experts, and a few of them said that the person who's going to live to 200 is already born. That's mind-boggling, right? The extension of lifespan, advancements in medicine. What's AI going to do to longevity? There's people who are really into longevity, So death has become an uncertainty, but even if people are not dying anymore, I think a lot of people are going to start dying, because the planet can only take so many people. Even if we solve a lot of the distribution problems with food and medicine and resources, like there is a finite number of people that the planet can take, or is there? Right? But like, if people stop dying, people are going to start dying. So there's endings. There's constantly endings. And we have this tension with endings. We need endings. We need deadlines to get stuff done, right? Most people, at least. But we also don't want to think about endings all the time. They're a big motivator, but also they're a big source of anxiety. So again, we have this tension when we have our relationship with endings. So there's meaning, endings, there's freedom. Freedom is often hailed as this holy grail. Everybody wants freedom. Freedom is a very good thing. Søren Kierkegaard, who might be called the godfather of existentialism, he was the first one who really started writing about these things. He wrote a lot about the dizziness of freedom, is what he called it. This that when you give someone too much freedom, there's a lot of anxiety in it, right? Every choice excludes all the other possibilities. So if I make one choice, I cannot make any of the other infinite choices that I've had on offer in that very moment. And maybe that's like, some people despair over choosing their lunch or their dinner from a menu. Some people despair over, who am I going to let myself fall in love with, or who am I going to commit to, or who am I going to marry, or am I going to have kids, or which job, or which degree am I going to study, what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. There's all these significant big choices. And then there's all these small choices that, if you pay attention to them, they can derail your life forever. Even am I going to go to the party, or am I going to cancel? That might change your life forever. I've sometimes often had talk to students about, which socks am I going to put on in the morning? The gray business socks, the funky, colorful ones. They can change your life forever, because you might be at an event where somebody is like, that this person, I really like them, but I think they might be too funky for our organization, or they might say, I want to talk to this person because they have something that sticks out, attention. Somebody's got their attention, and difference draws attention. Do you fit in, or are you going to be bold and do something very different? Are you going to lean into whatever feels authentic, or maybe you tame yourself a little bit to fit in and have the relationship that way, and then you slowly bring in your character? There's all these big and small questions that people grapple with. So freedom is linked to choice, and there's always uncertainty, and underneath, again, there's anxiety. So that's the third one, freedom. And then we have isolation, right? Otherness. Nobody can ever know what it's like to be me. No matter how many hours of coaching I'm in, or analysis, or how many songs I write, or poems, or how many decades we're married, right? Nobody can know the experience of being Yannick. So in that sense, I'm really very alone. I'm isolated because nobody can get me fully. So we strive to connect with others. We are social animals. We need the group to survive, right? Now, less than ever, which causes lots of different societal problems, but we're still hardwired for connection, because, thousands of years ago, we just wouldn't survive. And even hundreds of years ago, we probably wouldn't if we isolate ourselves. So we have this urge to connect, which is built into our system of evolution. But at the same time, we also have this urge to be our own person. And, especially in the West, this individualism, this me. I want to be me. I want to be authentic. I want to own who I am, and I want to be different, and I want to stick out. And, a lot of success is around being different. The people we look up to, usually they're very different, But then what's your relationship with otherness? And so taking into account this existential given of isolation, of this unbridgeable divide between you and others, alongside this urge to want to connect and merge with the group, that's a significant tension. And so taken together, that really characterizes the human condition. And that sits at the heart of existential coaching. So the existential coach would be curious. They would have that lens to explore people's relationship with isolation and meaning or meaninglessness, absurdity, freedom, choice, authenticity, otherness, belonging. It's a big one, right? What does it mean to live a good life? Anxiety, uncertainty. They're always underneath the surface of whatever anybody is bringing to the coaching space, even if the presenting issue is about weight loss, or how do I get the promotion? What career to choose? Oh, there's so many existential questions underneath that are much bigger and often not acknowledged. So a coach who has a lens for these underlying bigger questions, then maybe you can open the door into that kind of conversation. And maybe all these smaller presenting issues, they might get resolved, or well resolved, right? You can navigate them better by developing the courage to maybe bear some of the anxiety, and maybe use some of the anxiety as a good teacher. I think it's a life that is frictionless seems odd to me, because it doesn't happen to me. It means there's things you're not looking at. There's things you're not allowing yourself to see. Might be a very important defense mechanism, right, in this time of your life. But if you choose, Sartre calls it living in bad faith, which means denying an awareness of your own ability to choose and take responsibility. I think that's a big problem in today's day and age, that people don't take personal responsibility for things. So if you invite people to consider their relationship with responsibility and all these other existential themes, then people are empowered, and they might not necessarily feel a lot more comfortable, You might dare I even say happy, I think happiness must include this dialogue with your discomforts. And waves. We mentioned waves, right? I mean, so there's an invitation from the existential coach to consider yourself at a deeper level, which then helps you navigate all of these presenting coaching issues with more ownership, more courage, more depth, more meaning. And I come from I got big into hip hop when I was like 14, 15, keeping it real, keeping your eyes open and not deluding yourself and having the courage to look at things that might be uncomfortable. That's the invitation of existentialists, and that can feed into coaching in many different ways. There isn't one approach to existential coaching. Again, I'll pause there, otherwise I'll lose my voice. I mentioned I'm a bit ill today. That's hence me drinking tea a lot.
Yeah. And again, thank you. And what I hear in your sharing is, in many ways, existentialism offers one of the largest scale systemic lenses through which to approach coaching. And I appreciate how it supports one to integrate positive psychology into a whole that has both positivity and dynamism and a great deal of depth and rigor and foundational thought that's really exploring some of the largest. I think you actually used the phrase as you moved into exploring it, the largest questions in the human condition, and the big ones that some of us are grappling with, and that many people choose to avoid or ignore for big portions of their lives because they may simply seem too large to answer, and indeed some of which are unanswerable.
Yeah, that's the thing. These existential questions don't have an answer. I mean, they have many answers, but what always drew me to it, and that also is part of my story, I grew up in a house where my father and my brother, they were never wrong when I grew up. At least that was my perception. My brother was 5 years older. That meant much more, But they had this tendency to, when I knew something, even if it was in tension with what they're saying, they were just never wrong. So I was drawn to a profession where it's not really about right answers. It's not about me necessarily knowing things. So I really enjoyed holding space for people. And I'm, in retrospect, it's no wonder that I connected so strongly with the existential framework, because the clear invitation is that you need to figure this out for yourself. I might have figured out some answers for myself, but that's my answers. Like, maybe there's some people share those kind of perspectives. And I know many existential coaches, they offer some of the existential wisdom or ideas or theories, put them on the table. There's a piece of research that called existential coaching a psychoeducative approach. And I'm like, but that's totally not what it is for me. But it is, I guess, what it is for a lot of other people, to offer some pearls of philosophical wisdom and put it on the table for somebody to engage with it. But I don't think there are answers. I think, especially with the big questions, like what's a meaningful life? What's a good life? How do I navigate my career in a meaningful way? It depends so much on your worldview, on your values, on your beliefs, on your own authentic way of being, on what you've experienced in the past and what you want to create in the future. For a long time, I judged people who don't exhibit much courage and just rather have life be quite flat and comfortable. Not take much risks. And I'm like, but life is out there to be lived. I want to, engage in the whole spectrum of what life has to offer. And then I looked at the people who take that to the absolute extreme. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. You're going to die soon. Whoa. So I think everybody has to find their own way to get what they want out of life. And if you'd like to be cushioned and as comfortable as possible, you're also not going to get a lot of the experiences that you get from taking risks and being courageous.
Yeah.
But that's not better or worse. That's just a choice. So what I want in existential coaching is that people make conscious choices about how they engage in life and who they choose to be and how they choose to navigate their life and career and relationships. And then, own the consequences. for better or for worse. Sometimes you get hurt, sometimes it's elating, but if you never want to get hurt, then don't do anything risky. But then don't come back 20, 30 years later and say, oh, I wish I would have engaged more with life and taken more risks and gotten more out of it. Now my body is too old to go skydiving and I wish I would have in my 30s. As long as you make conscious choices, it gets me when people have regrets about how they live their lives. And I think coaching, and particularly existential coaching, is this invitation to step back and make more conscious choices so that, later on you don't regret what you could have or should have done.
Yeah. I want to helicopter back down into your journey, and on completion of the masters, I wonder what happened next, and perhaps it's also helpful, what was your first practical interaction with coaching as a practice, perhaps as a coachee, or exploring the core skills?
Yeah. So when I started the masters in existential coaching, we were thrown into coaching, right? So 2010 that was. We started coaching more or less immediately. And I'm not sure if that was coaching at the time, but we started having conversations straight away. And that's been my invitation to coaches who are in training. Like, you can start having conversations if you pick clients or if you pick conversation partners that are not currently in a deep hole and, risky to, you could really do some damage if you don't know what they're doing. If you pick people who are relatively resourceful, which is the coaching client as it's defined in most trainings, then you start having conversations. So we started having conversations, and then they became more and more coaching conversations. And the existential training allowed us to form our own approach to the practice without too many, this is how you need to do it, and here are the competencies, and here's the framework you need to use, which is very existential, right? So because there's people craving, and I saw that in the master's program all the time. Students come in and they want to know how it's done. Yeah. Just tell me the process and then I do it really well.
So if we slow down on that for a moment, where
Sure.
did you study your master's?
That was at the New School of Psychotherapy and Counseling in London, a small family-run existential school. Emmy van Derzen founded the school. Monica Hanaway created the master's program with her. And we were between 4 and 6 people in the cohort, right, throughout the masters, because it was quite new. And so we had so many different trainers throughout the modules, which was wonderful, as you can tell, in terms of my longing for diversity and different perspectives. But then they helped us. They didn't tell us necessarily, oh, this is wrong, this is right, because that's not the existential way. But they helped us to reflect on what happened there, how did it feel, how did it land with the client, hear different perspectives, and then helped us form our own way of doing this, which must be informed by who we are as a person. So who you are is how you coach was one of the first mantras that I've been given and that I've been passing on ever since. So as I was going through that course, my coaching approach developed, and I already started seeing clients towards the later stages of that. And in the beginning, I didn't charge. Then I started, big significant step up was when I started to charge £5 because all of a sudden people started to significantly less mock me around or, not do the work or not show up for sessions. So I'm like, oh, commitment.
Yeah. And it's extraordinary and the ICF define it as a meaningful exchange of value. But when you trip that line of 0 to £5, how something shifts, and there is a level of commitment guaranteed if somebody is handing over, albeit the price of a cup of coffee, to you.
Yeah, exactly. And somebody buying me a coffee was very different than somebody handing me a £5 note. Right. So my wife is a Lacanian psychoanalyst turned leadership consultant. But like in psychoanalysis, it would be very important that you hand over money because that's the meaningful exchange and it's done in person. It's very important. So I noticed it then. So that was a significant shift. And then I had this choice point that many coaches have, which is, do I do coaching full time now? I came out of this course, as many coaches still do. I'm a decent coach now. I have decent skill set. I can go out and coach people, but I have no idea how to run a business, because they didn't teach us any entrepreneurial skills. And so at that point, I was like, okay, so what do I do now? I created my first marketing campaign. I still remember it was like, I figured people who take care of their body to be healthy, they would be more likely to also take care of their mind. So I, created some flyers and put them in like yoga studios and like bio-organic shops and places where I figured people who take good care of their body would be, where's their attention? Because I started reading a bit about sales and marketing, and I realized, okay, so I didn't really want to run a marketing campaign. The word sales still on some level has a tension, because I always felt like that's just manipulating people into buying things they don't need. But then educating myself a little bit about what is sales actually and what is marketing and what could be my way of embracing that. Essentially, offering your help. So selling is an act of offering your help. So I did a lot of work during that time to remove the obstacles and the barriers to actually engaging and getting out there and calling myself a coach and offering that sort of service to people. The marketing campaign didn't really go places because I still had a bunch of barriers and, I didn't really follow up with flyers, etc. Flyers are not really a great way to market. It's really about creating connections. And as an introvert, my modus operandi is not to go around and connect to a bunch of people and just creating relationships and conversations. It doesn't come natural to me, even if, sometimes it can come across like that. During that time, then I'm like, okay, I really want to make this work. And as I was very close to, maybe I just need to get an HR job and build a network and create relationships and go the more traditional route of doing some organizational work and then bring the coaching back into that sort of thing. And as I was on the verge to do that, a job at the university popped up. And it was that same mentor who said like, hey, I think you might want to apply for this. So I had done some work with the university, some marking work, some guest lectures in the coaching and the counseling department, the career coaching students. So I had a sort of a foot in the door. Mm-hmm. And then Christopher Newberg left the coaching masters, the coaching psychology masters at UEL, and the job was open. And I applied and they gave it to me. So that was incredible. It opened a lot of doors and it got me to pay my rent and my food, on like 3 days a week and still have time to develop my coaching practice. So in a way, I got lucky, but also I realized in my own coaching, I needed to give myself some more credit for that because I did hone those relationships and I did show up and I did do a good job. And, I stayed connected and I presented well. And I'm really passionate about this stuff, so it probably helped. They gave me. Then I was spending 3 years of seeing the coaching psychology masters to its end because it was combined with the positive psychology masters, and the new masters in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, MAPCP, was just very groundbreaking. So I was teaching all the coaching students there from all the different coaching programs at UEL. There was the career coaches, the integrative coaches and counselors, the positive psychology coaches, and the coaching psychology students, and some counseling students who did a coaching module. So this diversity there was phenomenal. And I still consider myself lucky, but I also give myself some credit for being in an environment where my main job was very much coaching related, but I had enough time and freedom within that to hone my own practice and build my private practice without the burn the ships to take the island sort of approach. So that helped me to not push myself so much and show up relaxed to consultations because I didn't really need the coaching work and I allowed myself the time to let it build.
Yeah. I really hear that, and it resonates with some of what I've experienced as regards both the benefits of having a role working with people learning about coaching. So for me, that's the Academy of Executive Coaching as a faculty member, and also the freedom and groundedness and confidence it gives, well, speaking for myself, me, to show up to meetings with potential clients and not need the client. I think there is something enormously powerful about being able to fully sit or stand in a place of non-necessity for this piece of work, but rather
Yeah.
genuinely asking the question, how might I support you? Am I the right person to support you in this way? And with the knowledge that it's completely okay if that person chooses to not pursue coaching or to work with another coach. How long did that period last for?
Can I just
Please.
say, this is such an important skill to learn. In existential coaching, the main method really we work with is phenomenological inquiry, which means you bracket what you think you know and you leave your stuff at the door for at least this period of really tuning in with your client. And so it's such an important skill, and it is a skill that can be learned, to leave whatever is happening in your business at the door when you enter a consultation, when you enter a chemistry call, when you enter this first encounter with someone who considers to work with a coach, partner with a coach. Because I've had months and periods in my career when I'm like, I kind of really need this client and I kind of really need the money on my bank account. But when you come in with that kind of energy, it's getting picked up, on some level. Some clients are very perceptive to that. Yeah. Some clients are quite oblivious, but it still somehow shows, in the way that you hold space and the way that you relate. But when you put the work in to acknowledge your own stuff, put it in your box, keep the lid on, and when it rattles during the session, gently put the lid back on. And maybe sometimes I really, in my mind, use my leg and push it a little bit further out into the corner. Like, yes, thank you. I acknowledge you and let me do my thing now. Yeah. It's very important for the client, and it's very important also for your business, because people do pick up on that. And sometimes I come out of a consultation, I'm like, I can't believe I did that. Why did I send this person away? I'm like, I know why I sent this person away, because it wasn't a very good match. And when I get that feeling in my stomach, then, in that bottom left part, I know it's probably not the right fit, and they'll probably be in better hands to work with someone else. And then I come out of a consultation and that box opens. I'm like, what did I do? And I'm like, yes, I did the right thing. Fuck.
And you brought in the term phenomenological inquiry. So my practice is heavily informed by Gestalt, and I'm a huge fan of phenomenological inquiry.
Still happens after all these years, right?
I can even say it. And to some extent, it also speaks, for me at least, back to the experience as a jazz musician of improvisation and the spontaneous creation of form and meaning making by noticing what's happening rather than attempting to attend to what should be happening or what the rules state. So thank you for bringing that in and pointing out the breadth of schools of thought that it's present in, really sitting in the now and what's happening and the enormity of that and what's possible and available there for all sorts of different reasons. Coming back to my question, how long did that period last where you were in a role, albeit a heavily coaching involved role, for 3 days a week and building your practice 2 days a week?
So that was 2015 to 2018. And in 2018, I took the difficult decision to leave that position because it took a lot of my time, and a lot of my time, as most people experience in organizations, was not spent in my, my business partner of mine once called it a zone of genius. It was not really sitting with me well. I'm like, I kept having this feeling of like, why am I doing this? Somebody else should be doing this. Like I should lean into things that, where I'm really, doing things that are more meaningful. And yeah, I won't get into my. I wanted to write my book, right, on existential coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I had a waiting list for like 2 months of people that wanted to work with me. That was a financial good decision as well, because I was like, so one client, 6 sessions of coaching pays me the same as like 16 days on campus.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love teaching. I love holding space for people to learn. I love training coaches. All of this was so meaningful to me. All of the admin that was involved in having a job like that increasingly felt like this is not really me. And it wasn't an option to reduce my hours or choose only the best parts of the job. Also, it didn't really feel fair. So I took a difficult decision to step out of that, and so that certainty of having a set income at the end of the month, that definitely my rent and food is paid, that fell apart, well, it fell apart. I made it go away. Yeah. So, and I'm like, ooh, so this is interesting. And I've never regretted it as such, but occasionally my mind went back to, oh yes, that was in a way a lot more relaxed, but in many ways it wasn't. And it's interesting to notice which parts of life your mind remembers.
Yeah. And looking back on that period, perhaps sharing some things you did do, and perhaps sharing some things that you would do if you had your time again. What served you well in making that transition, both as a coach deepening their practice and a entrepreneur, a business owner, building something that was going to sustain them in terms of rent and food? And
yeah, so it taught me a whole lot of things, right? Because I now had to make this work. And first of all, it gave me the experience that many people have as they go through life, and also that many coaches have as they go through life. I work with a lot of coaches helping them build their businesses, and I had it quite cushy to that point. I didn't really need to worry. I didn't really have, pressure. I didn't have responsibilities in terms of family. So I could just kind of go with the flow. And that choice gave me the experience of like, ooh, how am I going to make ends meet? And how does it show up? And really having to learn the skills of leaving things at the door, which sometimes you think you've mastered something and then you realize, oh, now I'm in this new situation. And actually there's a couple of gaps. So, and then just learning things about marketing, about systems, about sales, having to take it a bit more seriously. Well, I say having, right? Having made the choices where that became a necessity. But then also really leaning into things that are more meaningful to me. I didn't regret it at all, even if I had my moments where I wished life was more comfortable. I didn't regret it at all. And having made courageous choices, the way that you then meet people who are facing courageous choices is a different one. And it's not that I want to push people towards courageous choices because I've made them and it worked out for me, because I can't know, right? And I know that as soon as I've made the choice, that commitment, it did the two things that commitment does. It focused energy into the future of something that I'm now more clear about what I'm building. But it also opened a sea of anxiety, so you can't have one without the other. And having a personal experience of what it's like to make these choices and, make a choice that makes you feel uncomfortable in many ways, but also makes life feel a lot more meaningful on the other hand. Having experienced that, I think it's helpful it adds to the quality of the space that you're holding. It's a bit like when somebody's had a near-death experience or lost somebody, has experienced significant bereavement in their life. They hold a different quality of space for somebody who's going through a similar thing. And you can't say it's the same journey, right? Every experience of bereavement, every experience of losing a job, every experience of quitting a job, burning the ships to try and create something is different. But there is something that it adds to the quality of the space that you're holding, that your client on some level resonates more. Even if you don't tell them your powerful story, as many marketeers would encourage coaches to do, there's something in the way that you hold space that is like, I've been in a similar space, and you may or may not make similar choices, but like, I'm here with you. And, there's a level of understanding, and even it can't fully understand, right? But there's a level of resonance is better than understanding, I think, that people pick up.
Yeah. And I hear that you got to a place where you had a waiting list for 2 months, and I imagine you'd built a number of connections through the work with students. And what else was in your practice as ways of marketing yourself? Perhaps you were going out and handing out more flyers, though it sounds like
I never handed any flyers out again.
that wasn't.
Oh no, that's not true. Actually, I designed a series of really cool cards, like postcards, inspired by spending some time in Berlin, where I now live. There was always these really cool postcards with something really engaging in most bars or venues. There was like the stand with various different postcards. Some were just advertising events, and some just had something really engaging that sometimes you would pick up and you just place it in your house because that was something cool to say, So I'm like, ooh, that'd be a really cool one. So I designed a series of just little words on a piece of cardboard that I would think people might pick that up and just put it somewhere because it's a good reminder about what it means to be human. It's something that catches your eye, and you might read the back of it. And there was an invitation to, maybe consider some of these questions. And if you wanted to, go further on some of these questions that I was hoping to throw up into the world, that sounds wrong. But, offer people who are going through the world and navigating their lives and careers. That might be a cool invitation. And that also was very unsuccessful, but I loved the creative process of it.
Yeah. So what was successful in bringing people into your practice?
Yeah. So what was most successful is to start building relationships. And I realized I didn't really spend much time looking at where my clients came from. Still in that period where I kind of had to make it work. But what I realized later on was most of my clients had come through building relationships. And so the majority of those was when I was spending time with people in groups, because that was already a part. And even having left university, I was still guest lecturing quite a bit. So when you spend time with a group of people or a person, you start building a relationship, even if it's in a different context, right? And a lot of these contexts was questions around psychology. Either it was coach training or some sort of supervision, or we ran for many, many years, these pub psychology events where we just met in a pub and we talked about psychology. And we invited people in. Sometimes we had a guest speaker. Usually it was just one of us organizing group, just throw some ideas into the group and have a chat about it. And these were just people who go to pubs. They weren't psychologists. We consciously wanted to take it out of the ivory towers of the universities and to the people, right? What do actual people you go to pubs? Just think about this kind of stuff. Forcing yourself to put it into plain terms, and seeing how it resonates. Again, Nash Popovich was the person who founded this, to just kind of test some of these ideas. And but spending some time facilitating a group, you build relationships if you're showing up authentically, right? If you're not just playing the role of a facilitator and you just deliver knowledge, but if you actually relate to people, which is my style of facilitating and teaching and training, then people already have a foundation of trust. And when they think about, maybe I could work with a coach, then the coach that they already have had spent some time with and build a relationship with and build trust with is probably a person that they would ask about it. Yeah. So spending time with people and being more vocal about me being a coach and me being into positive psychology. Most of my friends didn't know what I was studying, really. while I was studying. So a significant, not turning point, but milestone in my business was when I just started talking about what I do and what I'm into professionally more. And then people started to know me as not just this coach, but this existential coach. And whenever I told somebody I'm an existential coach, or I'm even when I was studying positive psychology, I already realized the response was usually, "Ooh, what's that? It sounds interesting, right? What's an existential coach?" And that's an invitation for me to talk about it. And as I'm talking about it, they can feel the passion. And whenever I talk about the human condition or big questions or positive psychology and how can we be happy or what is it about, all these doors open where people resonate and they're like, whoa, I hadn't asked myself this question. Or I've been asking myself this question for a very long time and I didn't know that there was some help out there or, something that could help me navigate this. And also, I've just been thinking about things that I haven't been thinking about in a very long time or ever. And these are the doors that then open. And what I needed to learn is to not just say, "Oh, that was a cool conversation, bye," but more like, "Hey, I, I feel obliged to ask, but like, it sounds like you've got some stuff going on, right? Or it sounds like you've got some questions, or just essentially, would you like some help with that?"
Yeah.
No, because I told you I'd do this work, and if you ever wanted to explore this kind of work, I'd be happy to invite you into another conversation, a bit more formal, without it being very formal because it's still me. But if you wanted to explore that more, I won't charge you a thing, but then we have a conversation. And if it feels right, maybe I can tell you about how this could work if you wanted to have more of these kind of conversations. And that's something I didn't want to do for a long time because I'd had this strange relationship with selling. But when I switched it, and in part that was working with my coach or one of my coaches that helped me to reposition myself towards what selling means. And I just was much more open to offering people this kind of help because they would always get much more value out of it than I would. All the money I've ever earned from coaching, I've spent. But, people are still walking around with the benefits of having had those series of conversations. So that was a real milestone.
I want to capture three things there. There may be other directions you want to take it, but the first is what I hear in your expression of what works in terms of building a practice is wholly aligned with what is a part of the coach's journey offer around the coaching business flywheel. So connect with people and tell them that you coach. Create a experience where you share more about what that coaching is. Invite, where appropriate, them into a coaching conversation to use some of the processes and the shape of those types of conversations to explore what it is that is live and important for them, and if appropriate, to propose working together. So not just to go, well, that was great and thanks very much, but rather say, there is the opportunity to take this further and to work in a coaching context with me. So that,
you summed it up.
Yeah. Well, it was actually so founder of the podcast, Robbie Swell, and there's lots of writing about it on the website and a model that explains it fairly concisely. So I definitely can't take credit for it, but I hear you articulating it in your way. The second thing is your point about one of your coaches, and one of the things I frequently say to people that are perhaps entering the profession, or they're studying coaching as a mode of doing something, is one of the best ways to learn is to work with a coach and experience the power of what's possible in coaching conversations. And certainly I have the experience of working with many coaches over the years and have benefited enormously. And then the third thing, and then I'll pause for a breath, is I really love that framing of, as a coach, I too have spent all the money I've earned from coaching and continue to spend that money. And I do genuinely believe that the value, like speaking from my experience of working with these set of coaches, the value that I've extracted from that is exponentially higher than what I've ever paid any of the coaches that I worked with. And I've worked with some coaches that I've paid a reasonable amount of money to, and they've not been very good, and I still got a much better deal than they did. And it is compounding. Also, there's a specific coach I can think of whom I worked with in 2012, and she should really be a billionaire by now if she was getting the same value as I've taken over the 12 years. What out of that resonates and is interesting as a jumping off point to?
Yeah, there's two bits. One is that yes, get a coach, and experiment with multiple coaches. It's also something that coaches like to say, because there's this coaches being coached by coaches who coach coaches who then coach more coaches. When somebody confronted me with that, I'm like, so you're a coach who coaches coaches. I'm like, oh shit, I do some of that, yeah. But it makes also a lot of sense, because coaches are the ones who you don't need to convince that coaching is something worth investing in. So, it's the easiest market for coaches, and those are the ones that know coaching exists and would look for coaches. So yes, of course, there's an aspect of this, circle. Experiencing it is very helpful. Watching it happen is also super helpful, right? And this goes back to Bandura's learning theory. We can learn from social interaction. And that's part of why we created the coaching lab. And maybe at some point we can talk about this more, but being able to witness and be a fly on the wall, play mouse in somebody else's coaching session is super rare still. I mean, now we're celebrating 5 years next month. So we've been going for 5 years, every month seeing somebody coach for 45 minutes, not like a 10, 50-minute demo. Often they feel staged. Rarely they get really critically engaged with. Often it's just kind of celebrating the coach and the approach. But 5 years ago, there was very, very few demos that you found online. And the ones you found were, I don't know, most of them are pretty terrible, I thought. Now there's more, but it's still rare that you can sit with the coach and the client and ask them, where did that question come from? What model was operating in the background? What other questions did you think about? How did you experience that silence? I saw your face twitch in that moment. What was going on there? There was this awkward something that I can't quite put my finger on. Do you remember? And then, you hear these in-depth reflections on something that you would never had any access in. Being able to look inside the mind of someone who's experienced coaching and is an experienced coach, it's still very rare, right? So yes, experience coaching, seek a coach, work with different coaches, reflect on your coaching, but also to watch various different styles of coaching. I always take so many nuggets from seeing people who work very differently. And then I always take so many nuggets from people who work very similarly. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to say is having spent £3,000 on a 6-session coaching engagement with a coach who turned out to not be a very good coach, was a pretty good mentor, so he gave me a lot of things that really helped, but it was supposed to be coaching and there wasn't that much coaching going on, I would say. And the coaching that was going on was actually fairly simple, fairly simple techniques, fairly straightforward, read a couple of books and done his thing. But I've got so much from it because I was £3,000 committed and
right.
It's not money that I necessarily had. So we agreed that I would pay him a percentage of my income, so because there was a lot of like, look at all the money you could be earning. It's like, oh yeah, 18K a month. That's entirely realistic with everything that you're bringing in. And I'm like, oh. In retrospect, I can see all the sales processes and the techniques that were used to sign me up to this engagement, but I was £3,000 committed, even if it was bit by bit. But I was like, I got so much from this because I wanted and needed to do the work and I was fully in it. the coach I was working with before, who made me a very generous offer for like a fee that was like half of his normal fee, because I think he liked me, saw something of me, of him in me, and he made me an offer that was just very generous. He wasn't about the money. He was the much, much better coach. And sometimes his assistant had to chase me to book the next session because I was only paying 50 quid, So yes, it was very interesting to have experienced the power of being very committed to something, and that it's not necessarily a reflection of how good the coach is, but it's a reflection of how committed you are to engaging in a process. And that really helped me to charge more money, because I realized that's not the money. The money is not for me. The money is for you to be really into this. And the more you are into it, the more you're likely to get out of it. Yes, I play a role, my relationship, my skills, where I'm coming from, my questions, but it plays almost equally a role how committed you are to this process, because the client has to do the work. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, the more I charge people, the more they get out of the coaching. And that really helped me to up my prices, which I was very uncomfortable with at the time. So there was a time when I went from I mentioned 5 quid an hour, right? Then I went to 50 quid an hour, and I stayed in that 50 quid comfort zone for like, I don't know, 5-6 years.
Wow.
And I had a student talk to me once and said, oh yeah, I'm charging 70 going on 90 now. And he was my student. And I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing is I stayed in my comfort zone because I don't have to sell if it's relatively little money.
Yes.
Right. So then I went from 50 to like 2,000 for a number of 6 sessions.
Okay.
And there could be 6 quite long sessions, but it was a serious increase. Right. By the way, I have a document where I wrote about the evolution of my prices. I have this coaching starter kit. If people Google my name and starter kit, they'll find it. There's one section of the evolution of my coaching offers.
Okay.
And that might be interesting for people to look. But yeah, that jump from 50 to 2,000 was significant. And the very first client was, first of all, shocked, but then they took out a loan for 10,000 to build the cabin in the backyard where they wanted to put their office. And then 2,000 of that for my coaching fees. And I'm like, now you're committed, really committed. And now I'm really committed. So it's what's interesting. Once I got over it's now up to me to remind myself that the only thing I can do is hold space and offer my presence. I don't need to have the answers for this person, even though they've taken a risk in working with me and I can feel it. All right. So, but that person made their money back, just as I did. The 3,000 pounds that I paid, like 2 clients later, I had made my money back. And that was 6 weeks into the coaching. And I'm like, it felt like so much money. And now it doesn't anymore, which really was another big milestone of elevating the practice, to realize that switch, that the money is for you to be committed, and also that it's not actually that much, even if it's thousands, compared to the benefits that people take from it. And you can make your money back very quickly when you're super committed. And maybe also I was ready, Yeah,
absolutely.
Hi everybody, I'm Robbie. I'm the creator and founder of The Coach's Journey, and I've just got one quick thing before we get back to the show. As part of our commitment to keeping episodes like this free so we can support you and coaches like you, we'd like to ask something of you. Wherever you're listening to this show, please click subscribe or follow for The Coach's Journey. That's a free way of supporting the show and helping us continue to support you and other coaches. Thanks in advance for subscribing or following, and if you want to hear about other ways to support The Coach's Journey, then listen all the way to the end of this episode or visit www.thecoachesjourney.com.
Thank you. We'll put the link to the starter kit details in the show notes. And I want to underscore the piece around the client need do the work. And I think it's touching back on something from much earlier in our conversation around responsibility and the responsibility of the client. And I wholly concur that when someone is making a more meaningful investment, that they are much more likely to own the responsibility for their work. And as I've heard it described, I can't remember by who now, pick up their end of the rope in order that there is that tension, that vibrancy in the relational field of what's possible. And also for us as coaches, that it ensures that we are able to show up in a place of sustained presence because we meet our needs as business people, and there is an equitable exchange of value. Because I do believe that along with our presence and holding space, one of the ways, and I think you've attested to it very clearly throughout everything you've shared so far, one of the ways that supports us in showing up in that presence and holding that space is to know our craft and to have kept on deepening our practice. And it's not to be clever or to know more content that we're going to share in the space, but rather to be better informed about how we can be present and hold space and the many things that sit beneath that. So thank you for articulating that.
And that might be a good transition into this next stage of evolution, right? Yeah. Because I talked about integration, and I, through my work at university and through all these trainings, and when you deliver a training, it's different when you work at an institution and it's a much longer course. I had office hours, right? And we were training on weekends. So there was always significant amount of time when you were just available for students to talk to you. I always started my weekends with just an open hour of bring whatever, and a lot of coaches getting into coaching, they would bring client examples and scenarios. And so I realized that I've already been supervising in some way. And then a colleague who, Nick Bolton from Animas, who founded a supervision school, or had played with the idea to find a supervision school. And then he got a supervision course together, back then still run under Animas. And he invited me in because we've done various pieces of work together. And he wanted to pilot this new course. I actually couldn't do the first one because I was training so much, but he invited me back kindly to the second one. So I added supervision training to my skill set because I had done it informally, and I felt this is a really good opportunity to do it more formally, because I love spending time with coaches. They tend to have their heart in the right place, but in a good, what I consider a really good place, tend to be more aware, more reflective, more considerate than many other groups of people. I like being around coaches. So adding that supervision lens and framework to my practice, in that training, there was a moment when I realized, oh, this is a lot more integrative than I thought it was, even in the literature. For me, supervision was, I take my client work to someone and then we reflect on what's happening in the coaching room. And that's a holding of space, because I came from my existential lens, right? It's a holding of space for a coach to reflect on their work. And then I realized that the training, there is an element of mentorship in many supervision models. There's an element of not just holding space, but sometimes maybe being more directive. This playing field that Dehaan picked up from Heron from the 70s, the different facilitation styles. You can be quite supporting, you can be quite challenging, you can be exploring, or you can be directing or offering guidance. You can share information. It can be a very catalytic session, or a very cathartic session. You can be a very informative session. Supervision in social work, there's a lot of, I'm making sure that you do good work. Supervision in coaching and in therapy is very different, but they have these elements there. And I realized that through talking to coaching colleagues, a lot of coaches have this mentoring hat that they're quite happy to let flow into their coaching work. And I'm like, but that's no longer coaching when you direct and you offer advice and you offer your own experience. And I remember for the ACIC, a coach training, I invited Peter Hawkins to do a demo. And there was this element in there, which I challenged him on. And he said, well, if you only hold space for particularly organizational clients, then they just keep being stuck in their loops. it's doing a client a disservice if you never intervene. And, this element of guidance is a very common element in organizational practice. You can contrast that with Nancy Klein's never, ever interrupt the client. Make the promise you will never interrupt even their thinking. Even when it's silent, don't interrupt. So I realized through that supervision training that there is an integrative element that I can offer. So this metaphor of a rocket came to my mind that jettisons the parts that it's no longer needed once you're in orbit. And I realized that, coaches in the beginning, that they want training, they read books, they want to absorb models and processes of how this is being done well. And it's helpful to be given that. Like you don't want school education to be, so what do you want to learn about today? Constantly, right? Yeah. There's the Montessori school style that is like much more engaged, much more of a coaching hat to education. But if the teacher never shares any knowledge or any information, I don't think that's a particularly good teacher. And I realized that in coaching, especially when coaches are just starting out, just lifting off Earth, trying to find their orbit as a coach, where the gravitational forces take over and everything feels a lot easier. You found yourself as a coach. At that point, you no longer need the fuel tank, which is the training and the mentoring. You just need to hold space for someone to keep being in orbit. But then hopefully coaches will want to change orbit and maybe explore more depth or of the universe, different planets, different approaches, whatever that may be. It can be really helpful to offer some of my existential lens or to offer some of my positive psychology approaches to a coach who might be very experienced. So this rocket supervision approach has been formed, that where I basically gave myself permission through that metaphor to give coaches access to all of my professional hats. And when I do more pure existential coaching, that doesn't really come in. With coaches is a lot easier because I do have the experience within coaching, and within existentialism, there's much less clear stuff. But so I gave myself permission in some of my work to just put some ideas on the table, and, clients have really appreciated that, and they really appreciate that often in coaching as well. That's why, there's very little pure coaching out there, even though coaching schools teach very pure coaching, very facilitative. Don't bring yourself in, don't share opinions, don't give advice. Out there in the real world, it's quite common that a coach would do that. A very small majority compared to the number of coaches are ICF credentialed, and many ICF credentialed coaches don't really stick closely to the competencies. So that was another milestone in terms of, now this opened up. I'm clear where the boundaries are, and I'm careful how to create the contract and the agreement around framing my space with each individual client. Yeah. What kind of work are you looking for? But I saw that in the more coaches mature, the more they're open to integrating and maybe breaking some of the rules as and when that feels appropriate and maybe even necessary.
Yeah, I'd like to slow down on this as relates to the concept of non-directive coaching and the journey a coach may go on from their early education through to being fully in orbit themselves or owning they are a coach, and also what's happening in practice in the real world, and the view of the accrediting bodies. And what I hear you articulating is something that comes up in the coach training I facilitate a great deal, and the capacity for coaches who have developed a significant skill set and a body of experience to more elegantly move into places where they might offer something in a way that is from a largely non-directive stance, but a way of perhaps challenging or provoking a client to reframe or reconsider, and drawing the difference between that and a less experienced, perhaps someone very early in their journey with deploying coaching skills, consulting on a client's problem or directly offering advice from a place of mentoring, and that there is quite a delta between the two, and the experience for the person receiving the approaches from those two places of early stage coach to fully formed and highly experienced coach. I wonder what that sparks for you.
I love the image of a delta because there's so many different ways of doing this, right? There's so many different arms that the work can take. What this sparks is that every coach needs to find their own way of doing things. And I would have liked, there was a time when I wanted coaching to be a certain way. And I found myself judging people who don't do it in a way, but this is not coaching. You shouldn't call it coaching. You know, when part of the beauty of coaching is the lack of regulation in coaching is that there is no barrier to entry, right? People can do their own thing. And there's lots of downsides to it. And we're trying to professionalize the profession more, and the professional bodies do some really good work. But also by definition, it then becomes more gatekeeping, and it has benefits and pitfalls. But as an existentialist, I appreciate the freedom, right? And what's most important is not that what you call coaching is coaching as agreed by a meaningful majority or as some sort of authority. I think what's important is that as you are connecting with someone, you have a clear enough way to let them experience or to explain what your coaching is and isn't, so that you frame your space, that they have an experience of what that's like and what you mean, or that you explain it in a way that they can grasp it as clearly as they can. It's difficult to fully grasp it. But if somebody says, yes, I want more of these conversations, which I mentioned earlier quite consciously, I say, do you want more of these conversations? If somebody says yes or no to working with you on the basis of what they've just experienced or what you just explained, then it's ethical, in my view. You know, if you're transparent about what you are willing and not willing to do and what you're expecting from the other person, and if you had a conversation about what they can and cannot expect from you, and they say yes on that basis, it doesn't matter what you call it. It really doesn't, not in coaching. So some people might say, yes, I want coaching. I mean, coach me through it. I mean, tell me what you know, and so I can do what you're doing. And if the person is reasonably similar to you and the situation is reasonably similar to yours, a lot of what you're sharing will work for them. And it will provide tremendous value, probably much quicker than any more facilitative coaching could have. You know, people are longing for blueprints. They're longing for mentors or gurus or people who tell them how it's done. And then you can learn from the people who do it really well. That's fine. You know, if somebody's, often it goes more deeply and people own the results more if they do the work. Sometimes they don't have the luxury of time to do the work themselves. Sometimes it's helpful to have some sort of inspiration. I think a coach never needs to jump in with their own story and their own solutions. They can also invite the client to look elsewhere. But if I have something that feels really meaningful, it might be unethical to keep sitting on it. The person's house is on fire and you know where the exit is. Just bloody point to it. They might get hurt. What do you think you could do in this situation? Who do you think you could ask? Like, if the house is on fire, that's unethical. If the house is on fire, is that still coaching? Should you, So, but there's multiple facets and layers. But that delta idea is quite helpful. Everybody needs to figure out their own way of coaching, or to accept or reject the authorities on coaching. Yeah. The professional bodies have imagined competency frameworks. A lot of the competency frameworks have not been developed out of research. EMCC more, ICF less. I really like the AC's work, but in essence, there's a very small group of coaches that guide the frameworks of what coaching is and isn't. And so, especially in the psychedelic space, I have a lot of people on the podcast who do not come from coaching. They come from psychedelic work, and then they call what they do coaching. And some have read a book, others not. Some have done formal training, others have not. So that freedom of holding space for people to figure some things out and owning the way that you show up, that's what's important. Have that conversation, learn to be good at having that conversation so that people can give you informed consent. It's really what we're talking about here.
Yes. And that resonates very much, informed consent. And also, again, jumping back to something you shared earlier in our conversation, which fills my heart with joy, the statement, who we are materially informs how we coach. And I could not agree more with a statement.
We are is how you practice, I often now say, because it goes far beyond coaching. And it comes from, like, much later, I found this Zen saying of how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yes. Yeah. Lovely.
So yeah, if you've been a teacher for decades and you've always been giving advice to people your whole life, chances are your coaching style is going to be that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That said, I encourage anyone to challenge the way that you've always done things. When I did my mediation conflict resolution training, the majority of the participants were lawyers, and it was an existentially informed psychotherapeutic model of mediation. So you could see that day by day, some of the lawyers flipped and realized that their way of digging for information, in a very technical way, in a very matter-of-fact, objective way, started to break apart for some of them. And they were more open to holding space for people and allow this phenomenological inquiry of what this conflict is really about to open up new ways of making meaning of this conflict, which opens up more ways out of this conflict, find common ground. And some of the lawyers that have always been doing this, very technical inquisition of facts, some of them were not willing to take that apart. And there are some forms of mediation that work more like a negotiation. Yeah. And that can also be really helpful. Yeah. I think psychology is very powerful and often not utilized enough. But the argument here, the point I'm making is that just because you've always done things in a way that you've been doing it, if you challenge your paradigm, sometimes the paradigm shifts, because you realize, when I try it out, it has tremendous impact and value. Maybe it might be helpful to leave my paradigm and maybe do things in a different way. So there's coaches who've always been given advice, and then their experience through their training and some conversations that not giving advice and continue to hold space and let go of this idea that you need to know things has much better results than offering what you know. Yeah. And then those people become very different coaches, and usually also very different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I hear in that is, through shifting and practicing in different ways, that we can expand our range and make intentional choice from a broader spectrum, and that everybody benefits from that place. And also, I believe part of the journey for some, and I've experienced this through the coach training I facilitate, it can be quite confronting to be asked to change the ways that you've done things, whether it's interrogative as a lawyer or didactic education as a particular type of teacher, to begin practicing a new skill, and the things that presents to you as a way of being in the world, and a way of feeling that you bring value to a situation, the potential for unlearning along with learning. I'm growing increasingly conscious of time and the things I still have in my notes that I'd love to cover. So I'm going to propose we jump forward to current day, and perhaps any headlines that come up about the intervening years as regards, what does your coaching business look like today? What does it contain? And you've already brought in Go Coaching Lab and talked about the 5-year anniversary, the future of that. Where are things at? Where are things going?
Yeah, I think it's actually quite a smooth transition, right? Because I talked about adding that supervision, that especially at Rocket supervision frame, I talked about really enjoying hanging out with coaches. So I talked about learning more about marketing and what that actually means. And Well, the target group for existential coaching is a tricky one because the niche is people who are alive in the world with other people. So it's not very well defined in terms
demographic.
of the demographic. It's quite large. Yes, there is a bit of a psychographic in there in terms of people who have a propensity to think more at depth. People who are reflective on bigger questions. They don't need to be for existential coaching to happen. So yeah, as I was thinking about, where could I actually, if I were to put some sort of campaign in place, or I'm like, what do I do with my website's SEO? It's very tricky to do that. So, but this hanging out with coaches, this really enjoying and also offering a lot of values. This is something that came quite organically, that I trained coaches, supervised coaches, and then also coached other coaches because I was just moving in those circles. I'm like, oh, there's much more possibility to be a bit more targeted in the messages that I put out there and who I'm reaching. So I needed to free myself from this idea that choosing a niche just means that I'm now limited to that niche, because all the conversations that are happening, they still bring in conversations, relationships, and clients. But where do I choose to focus my marketing energy was the question. Mm-hmm. And then I chose that, if I picked one group, then it would probably be coaches because I really like them. And the generative impact of it is very meaningful to me. The generative impact of existential leadership coaching, also very meaningful to me. But it's, as someone who's not grown up in corporate America, if you wanted to label it as such, I didn't have that network in organizational work that just made it easy to create those kind of relationships. The relationship with coaches, they were just there. They're just organically created. So it was a no-brainer, really, once I really sat with it through that lens, to create a website for coaches that spoke particularly to coaches. And then again, my desire for diversity was like, it's brand new coaches, but also very experienced coaches that I found in my supervision room. And I still kind of refuse to create services just for newbies or just for very experienced ones. Yes, I have some supervision groups that are only for very experienced ones or only for newbies. And that makes sense in terms of the supervision approach and the nature of the group. But really, it helped me to talk to coaches more directly and help coaches be the best coaches they can be. The coaches that are committed to development, to keep reflecting on their work, that have this desire to practice the best they can, right? And curious to add and integrate, create some balance, show up for their clients in this way. I just love being with those people. So for me, that made a lot of sense that I create services and products for other coaches. So that was then I started to realize, okay, what's my funnel? I hated the word funnel. I have less hate for the word funnel now, because for me, the way I saw it or repositioned it is that I have a certain sphere of influence, and a funnel allows someone, a funnel that might be the book that I wrote, or an article that I write, or a piece of social media content, or a conversation that I have somewhere, a conference talk that I deliver. They are all opportunities to enter my sphere. So somebody who would like to learn in partnership or through a relationship of some sort, even if the relationship is one-sided, like a podcast with a listener who doesn't directly engage, it's still a relationship. I just don't know that they exist yet. Yeah. So I realized that these were opportunities for someone to enter that sphere, and that I really enjoyed creating a bigger sphere because of that meaningful generative impact. So, and then I started thinking, okay, what do I actually have that I can be more concrete about in terms of how I offer it? And those were things like the coaching lab, which just came also very organically. At some point, I wanted more opportunities out there to witness other people coaching. And some of it was very selfish because I talk with people a lot about coaching. And very often I'm like, I wish I could see you actually practice. I wish I could see what all this talk translates to when it comes to action. And sometimes I'm like really surprised at how much more amazing it is than your words. And sometimes I'm like amazed at how much more amazing your words are than what's actually happening in the room. Yeah. But regardless of what happened, that's why I call it a lab. And I'm wearing a lab coat right in front of a lab background. I never liked dressing up, but I really liked embodying this lab spirit, because in science, often we learn the most when the whole thing blows up or nothing happens. And we're trying to make sense of that. So there is no pressure to create amazing transformative moments. One of the sessions that I learned the most from was when there was a somatic coach working with someone who said they were up for doing some somatic work, and then they just weren't. So nothing happened for 45 minutes. But to then tune into like how the coach sat with this nothing happening and how gentle they were in their invitations without breaking this person open. You know, we had a psychodynamic coach that just, I thought it was going to be a lot more, I don't know, a lot more Freudian, a lot more like going into the depth of your psychology. And she was very gentle with it and just building up, making it safe, you know. So there's a coach who was very model oriented and could give you a detailed analysis of all the influences theoretically that dropped into the coaching approach and when and how they showed up. And then another coach the next month who literally told me, I don't remember anything of what just happened. I couldn't tell you any of the moments that stuck out because I'm so present and I'm so unattached to what was happening that it's just super intuitive. So that was really interesting. So the coaching lab was kind of born out of that. The supervision, more traditional rocket supervision, then events to just bring coaches together, building more of a community of practice. So all of these marketing efforts to go into bringing coaches together and looking at what's the word, kind of infrastructure do I have in terms of what I offer. So the starter kit came out of that. I've naturally started writing about things that I've experienced in the coaching room or in the supervision room or in training rooms. I think about coaching a lot. So a lot of what I write about is stuff that is helpful for coaches. And a lot of the stuff that's helpful for coaches is also very inspiring for coaching clients, you know, because they get an insight into some of these processes, but also some of the material or the content that comes into coaching sessions. So that's where I decided for the last couple of years to invest a lot of energy into creating. Like I realized that, it takes my assistant like 10, 15 minutes to onboard someone into the coaching lab. I think, now that we've grown a bit, we need to figure out systems. And I'm not a systems guy. So I'm very big picture. I'm not very detail oriented. I'm very present. I'm not very future minded, So I had to do a lot of work on myself. And, at some point we had a team of 5 who were doing like about 10, 15 hours a week each. And who am I as a leader? How do I show up? How do I manage a team? How do I navigate processes? How do I figure out a way to deal with admin in a way that doesn't tie me to the desk for like 14 hours a day? So
on the team of 5, were they across all the different parts of your business, or were they each one focused on one area?
Yeah, I started with one. I got burned a couple of times with personal assistants or virtual assistants. So there was a learning curve for sure in terms of what work do I give them? What can I expect from them? What can I expect from people at different rates? So delegation and outsourcing is a journey that I had to go through, being okay with good enough and allowing people to make mistakes and being okay with things not working out exactly as I would have done them. That was difficult whenever it comes to managing a team. So 3-4 personal assistants later, I found someone who's been with me for many years now. Then I added an assistant for her because she kind of moved up into a bit more managing processes, and someone who just followed protocols and executed based on very, very clear guidance. Then I had someone to do tech things like setting up websites and maintenance, and so I don't have to throw my laptop out of the window because something is supposed to work but it doesn't, and I know it's my fault. And then I started looking for someone who would really like this detail orientation. I'm not a person who sits down every week or even every month or even every year to look at the numbers. What has worked? Where do my clients come from? What should I do more of? What can I do less of? I just kind of go with where my passion lies. And at some level, that's not wise anymore when there's a whole group of people working together. Yeah. So I was always craving someone who's this kind of managing director who can come in and manage processes for me so I can lean into the things that I'm really good at, where my strengths are. And I needed a bit of capital for that to work. So in the beginning, it was more on partnership and revenue share basis. And yeah, I'm still experimenting with that. I had some people come in, then I realized they're way too similar to me. That's why I like them so much, but it doesn't actually work in terms of what I need. I worked with a content manager and copywriter for some time. And that was a real struggle because authenticity and integrity are such a crucial element of my being and also my business that, having somebody else write things for me in my voice never sat right, and again, I tried with 2-3 different people and I never liked it, and then I met somebody who really got me. It was a process of like 6 months to a year until they like really got me. But over the past year and a half, I'm sure many people who know me noticed that the nuggets that I write, the mailing list, that was always me. But some of the social media content was taken from a video we've recorded, and then she would write a caption from that video, and I trained her to stay very close to what I'm saying, Yeah. But then there was a lot of content going out that wasn't written by me, but the ideas and the message and the sources, the resources came from me. But I still grapple with that because I want to be very authentic. And as soon as you're scaling, it's by definition impossible to be the same kind of authentic anymore. When you develop into a brand, it's a very odd process for someone who cherishes authenticity so much. Right? Yannick Jacob is not only a person anymore now, it's also a brand that has a certain communication style, and you can have other people write things under the name of the brand that I appreciate the message and I fully sign it off. But if I look at all the words and sentences in isolation, I'm like, but I had to really stop micromanaging because I just don't have the time. Otherwise, you cannot go out with a bigger message and reach more people, which ultimately I wanted to do. So that's been a very interesting journey to learn to delegate and to learn that the message and the resources you're putting out, the service, the help is more important than perhaps the authenticity in each of the words that are being communicated.
And I wonder, where from here, to what extent is there a plan or a strategy as regards the next phase?
Mm-hmm. So there was a very clear strategy. That's why I'm saying in the beginning, right? You're at an interesting point right now, because for the past, I think it's about 3 years after the coaching lab was just something that I did, just something that we put out there, fun events, and then I realized, there's something here that could really scale, right? There's something here where I can build something that has a membership model where we build a community of practice where I can run like several labs a week easily. I can train facilitators to do this in a way that is really beneficial. I can build an ecosystem here of value for coaches with all of the things that I've created without me necessarily having to show up for every event. I can have a regular monthly income again. I'm like, I really like this. I really like this idea of me creating an infrastructure where people I trust do good enough work and people keep showing up and there's a monthly income and I can lean into things that I love doing. I can create, I can have interesting conversation. I can have interesting conversation, and have other people take the nuggets and the content from it, and I don't have to oversee all of the production, and then having that be a feedback loop. I feed them, they feed me, that's a amazing vision, and I still love the vision. The reality of managing that kind of business had been a lot more tricky, right? So we've invested so much over the last couple of years in everything we've put out there, and the systems, managing the systems, all of these platforms, tech problems that nobody's ever get to see, just things that do your head in on a very detailed technical level that I'm like, why does this have be so complicated? So that's the reality of managing a business. And then I realized, I've always kind of judged people who present themselves as coaches, but they're actually business owners. They don't actually coach anymore. They're just now train coaches. And I never wanted to lose the closeness to the practice. So I still run a dozen supervision groups, and I still have about 15 hours of clients a week. Right. So, and next to managing a business, it takes a lot. Yeah. And my daughter is 3 years old now. Right. So the restraints on my time were tremendous, and that stretches a lot. And then there was COVID, and then coaches are just so over marketed to that it's difficult to be very visible. Everybody I talk to about the lab, they're very excited. Everybody comes to the lab is very excited, but also showing up regularly to a 3-hour event, or even the membership, we have a vault of over 50 sessions. It's tremendous amount of knowledge and inspiration of the bandwidth of coaching. And yet people don't buy into it as much as I need them to be to justify spending thousands of pounds every month for the management and the content production. Right. So, I'm also not the kind of person that loves doing that. And I don't yet have the capital to pay someone a 6-figure salary to manage the business. So it's a very interesting time. Hence, right now, I'm leaning a bit more into my authentic self and being out there more and having conversations and connecting to people, rather than like forcing the content creation. We still put a lot of content out because I love having these conversations. And I had a couple of people who offered to work with me in some way, and they create snippets, and, I'd still retain my content person for a couple of hours a month, just so we can have more things coming out there. But yeah, the forcing a system and a vision and a clear plan and a strategy, it's not me. And so right now, and this feels quite vulnerable, right? It's a very interesting time where I'm like, there's a part of me that really enjoys leaning into the authenticity of it. And I think that's where I do my best work, and it resonates the most with people. And I can see that from the feedback. As soon as I made the decision to take a step back and let the content strategy pause it and see what happens, I had lots of clients coming my way, like 7 in a week. As soon as I made the decision, I'm like, interesting. And also really interesting opportunities have developed now because I allowed myself to be more open to opportunities. So now learning a lot more about AI in this training, during the training, done this masterclass on reflective supervision. We invited someone who developed an AI supervisor into the coaching lab. Now I've found a platform that I had been waiting for in terms of GDPR and data protection and ethics, where I can train my own supervision system. So over the next 2 months, I'll be doing a lot of work in this direction. I would have definitely said no to getting even close to that while I was so focused on creating a strategy around scaling the lab. So it feels really good to lean back into myself. At the same time, there's still this part of me that is like, is this wise in your 40s to not work towards a clear strategy? And that's, I think, an interesting tension that a lot of coaches feel, that the path of most authenticity feels right, but then also some things you might need to make yourself do in order to get what you want.
Yeah. And I also hear the resonance with, in some respects, what's come up thematically through our conversation, the expanding your range with all the experience and skills that you've built to this point, now looking at things from a different angle and perhaps doing some things a little bit differently, perhaps allowing some things to dismantle, and also being alive to the phenomenology. I will get it right at one point, but the curiosity and aliveness of now and what may happen, and doing one of the things I judge to be a superpower in coaching, simply being willing to say, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what's going to happen. In our remaining 2 minutes, I'm going to sort of use one of your terms, Yannick's nuggets, which I regularly consume and enjoy. If you had some nuggets to share by way of closing to the audience of this podcast, which is largely coaches who are grappling with many of the things in different ways that I think we've alighted on through the course of our conversation, what would those be by way of final thoughts?
Yeah. I think an important one is that there is an authentic way of doing business and creating your own business. If you force yourself into a structure, I admire people who are able to force themselves into a structure and just get it done. Here's a blueprint, I try it out, it's successful, but it doesn't work for everybody, right? If you're that kind of person that can just make yourself do a certain thing for months and then just be happy with the results, very, very cool. But I know a lot of people, there's so many overwhelming messages out there that things need to be done in a certain way. And the existentialists and I offer that to challenge that kind of dogma, not necessarily reject it, but have a very courageous and honest dialogue with how things are supposed to be. And that can be coaching, and it can be how to build a coaching business. And find a way to do it yourself. Even if you do something that works less well, but you do it authentically and passionately, it's probably going to work a lot better than if you force yourself into a structure that is supposed to work. So the way that you coach, the way that you work with people, the way that you run a business, most of the rules are imagined. Right? So I'd invite people to challenge the status quo and find their own way of doing that and really leaning into it. And it's that kind of really passionately, authentically leaning into a way of doing things that, in my experience, is always more successful than if you force yourself into a role.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Plenty more nuggets to go around.
Fantastic. Well, we will include all the links to the various places people can find you that you've shared: Existential Coach, Rocket Supervision, Go Coaching Lab, the mailing list, and also your YouTube channel. Sincerely, once again, thank you so much for finding the time to share your journey so far. I really appreciate it, and know many others will too.
Neil, my pleasure. Thank you.
Hi everybody, Robbie here, and just a few quick things to share with you before you go on to the rest of your day. Thanks for getting all the way to the end of this episode. I'm imagining that means that you think the work we're doing is important and valuable. We think so too. That's why I want to tell you about a way to support the coach's journey and get coaching from me and be part of an amazing group of coaches. That is, join the Coach's Journey community. It's my flexible, affordable group coaching program for coaches. You pay between £20 and £100 a month and get access to a certain number of group coaching calls each year, plus some one-to-one time with me if you're a full member, and various other benefits. And of course, you get the chance to be connected to other amazing coaches on their own journeys. You can join the Coach's Journey community at thecoachesjourney.com/community and find loads more there, including testimonials. One of the additional benefits you get right now is that you get 20% off the cost of a place at the workshop that Claire Pedrick and I are running in Malvern in the UK on the 10th of May 2025. It's called The Artful Coach and the Soulful Coaching Business, and it's the first time we're working together. You get 20% off just by being a member of the community. You can find out more about that event by finding Claire's latest appearance on the podcast, or Googling The Artful Coach and the Soulful Coaching Business. If joining the community isn't right now, but you want to give us some financial support at the Coach's Journey, you can become a supporter of the podcast. There's links to that in the show notes wherever you're listening. And if that's not right for you either, please do click subscribe or follow wherever you're listening to the show. It really makes a difference to us being able to continue to keep this show free. Thanks so much to everyone who supported the Coach's Journey over the years, but in particular, thank you to Alex O'Neill, Alex Whitten, Alan Bedding, David Norris, Jessica Jem, Linda Ransom, Lucy Braun and Michael Trugman for your ongoing support. Thank you too for listening, and we hope to have you back with us on the Coach's Journey podcast sometime soon.